This video will contain heavy themes. Viewer discretion is advised. This manga has been sitting on my must-read list for years, but I've always put off reading it as I heard the same things. It's depressing, it's heavy, don't read it if you're not ready to cry. And I finally think it was time to sit down and read it, all 147 chapters. And I don't even think when you think you're ready to read Goodnight Punpun that you're truly ready for this story. Punp Pun is a slice of life of sorts written by Asano, and it follows Punp Pun in the early stages of his life and the tragedies that follow. Punp Pun's story begins in elementary school with his crush moving away. He might have dodged a bullet. Anyways, as fate would have it, a new girl moves to town, Aiko, and for Punp Pun, and his love at first sight. But sadly, not all is well in Punp Pun's life. His father is a drunk and his mother emotionally distant. And it appears one morning his father has assaulted his mother, landing him in jail and his mother in the hospital. Punp Pun is then put in the care of his uncle. But hey, he confessed to the new girl and things seem to be going great. Punp Pun just has one tiny issue. What is a relationship and what does love mean? I mean, his greatest example has just been shattered before his eyes, but that's beside the point. He meets Aiko again with her mother this time, as they're soliciting his uncle, trying to get him to join their cult. Aiko is embarrassed and runs away, and Punp Pun gives chase. And after a lot of yelling, Aiko says that she's running away from her mother because she doesn't like the cult activities, and Punp Pun promises to go with her. A promise that will completely change Punp Pun's life. For starters, the kid realizes he has to get money, and he doesn't work a 9 to 5. He's in elementary school, so how is he going to get a bunch of cash to take her where she wants to go? Well, him and his friends find a porno tape. Stick with me, okay? The tape is actually a confession of a man saying that he's murdered his entire family, and he reveals where he's buried the body, and that if you go find the bodies, you'll find cash, which is supposed to be compensation for you then going to the media and the police, basically saying, hey, this guy murdered his family. Of course, the boys do this because they're like, money. But Punp Pun is specifically doing it because he needs the money for Aiko. After not finding any of the bodies or cash and almost having a near-death experience that isn't as important, they just leave, and it's probably one of the last times that Punp Pun feels hope as he and his friends look up at the night sky and see a shooting star. Which, as the series kind of progresses, we kind of see that the shooting star does represent Punp Pun's hope. Getting back with what happens with him and Aiko, again, Punp Pun is an elementary school student and not a billionaire. He can't take Aiko where she wants to go, and this leaves Punp Pun with a lot of guilt. He feels like he let her down, a person that he really truly cared for and loves. Now remember, Punp Pun's idea of love and what he's seen is that if you hurt the person you love, you're a really bad person. Essentially, what this means is Punp Pun will use this one experience to explain every bad thing that ever happens to his life. And I'm not gonna lie, a lot of bad stuff ends up happening in Punp Pun's life. His mother gets cancer and she passes away. His uncle's girlfriend sexually assaults him when he's in high school. And that's only some of the terrible stuff that happens to Punp Pun. But due to these experiences and due to him holding that guilt from basically letting Aiko down, Punp Pun has become darker over the course of the series. And it's starting to be represented from this one character that he calls God. To Punp Pun, God is an entity that he can talk to ask for advice, when we, the readers, know that this is actually just Punp Pun's thoughts. As a child, the thoughts aren't that helpful, but they're not that bad either. But then as the series kind of goes on and Punp Pun grows more depressed, God's advice becomes darker. Essentially, he goads Punp Pun into killing himself, or hurting others. And Punp Pun follows his advice very religiously. This was really fascinating to me because not only does Punp Pun have this kind of character, but we also see some other characters have a sort of dark voice that whispers to them. And I mean, it's realistic. I think everyone has had those thoughts that tell you that you're worthless, that you're never going to amount to anything, and then the ones that are even darker than those. And I think it's just a very unique way to kind of represent it in this manga. And for Punp Pun, this voice is getting worse and worse because he keeps bottling up these emotions. He keeps just pushing them down and tries to act as if nothing has happened. And it does get to the point where it starts to get to him. He becomes depressed. He becomes numb. He feels like he has nothing to live for, so he gives himself a time limit. He has 2 years to find a reason to live, and he makes that reason Aiko after seeing her by chance, because he remembers that Aiko made him feel good, a feeling he hasn't felt in a while. And as you can imagine, looking for one person in a major city can be extremely difficult, especially if you don't have any other contact information. And so Punp Pun's search is very unsuccessful. Now, Punp Pun has kind of taken on a second form at this point. He's no longer a bird. He is a pyramid of sorts. Some fans say it's because he's bottling up his emotions. Others say it's because he's trying to protect himself from the outside world. I kind of like the thought that it is because he's trying to protect himself. Punp Pun at this point has experienced so much hardships, so much untrustworthy people in his life, a kind of shell around himself so that way he will no longer get hurt while he's on his search. At some point in an art show, he sees this artwork that looks exactly like that night sky, and then he meets the artist. Him meeting her will be very important, and he won't run into her again until years later, where he accidentally runs into her in a snack bar by chance. It's almost as if it's fate. Her name's Sachi. Now, Sachi is important for 2 reasons. 1, she's the opposite of Aiko, and 2, she represents Punp Pun's hope. She basically gives Punp Pun a reason to live by saying, hey, I went through hardships, I can see you're going through hardships, I can give you a purpose, and has Punp Pun work with her on a manga. And this does work. It gets Punp Pun moving back in his groove. He's feeling better. They almost form a relationship. But remember, Punp Pun has that voice in his head telling him that he's worthless. He's telling Punp Pun he's gonna fuck everything up. And Punp Pun listens to this voice, remember? So when the manga doesn't do well, Punp Pun blames himself, which then drives a wedge between him and Sachi. It's at this point that Punp Pun just decides, I'm done being me. I don't want to be Punp Pun anymore. I'm going to adapt a new personality. He does this essentially so he can just be the cool, confident person that he wants to be without feeling any of the depression or guilt. Essentially a husk of himself. And I guess this works out for Punp Pun because he meets a lot of women, he kind of sleeps around with them, and everything seems to be going great in his life. Until he runs into Aiko again. Now, Aiko is an interesting character because her and Punp Pun's fates are so intertwined at this point. They both grew up in what essentially is abusive households, just Punp Pun more emotional and hers more physical. And just like Punp Pun, she's living in the past. She believes that Punp Pun or somebody is going to come and rescue her from her environment. She believes this person to be Punp Pun because of how their upbringing is so similar. Because Punp Pun is driven by his guilt and the voice kind of telling him that this is what he wanted, this is always what he wanted, to be with Aiko. And with his relationship with Sachi getting a lot worse, it's just a recipe for disaster. And in the end, he decides he's going to choose Aiko. This is important because at this point, the reason that Sachi's and Punp Pun's relationship failed is due to the fact that Sachi is trying to save Punp Pun, a person that cannot let go of his trauma nor his past. He is not willing to accept help to heal. He just wants to ignore that it happened and that it exists. And due to that, the two never really form an actual connection. They never actually get to know each other on a personal level. They didn't actually develop a relationship. It was just about a savior and a victim. Now what is about to happen is now Punp Pun trying to save Aiko. 2 people that need help, who can't let go of the past, but also run from it. So as you can imagine, this isn't going to go as well. As I mentioned earlier, Sachi and Aiko are completely different, and how they are different is how they affect Punp Pun's mental state. As we saw, as Punp Pun hung around Sachi, his mental state got better. And now we're going to see what happens when he hangs around Aiko. So, Aiko and Punp Pun go to Aiko's mother and tell her Aiko is leaving and there's nothing you can do about it. And as you can imagine, she takes this as well as any adult would. So when Punp Pun is defending himself, that voice finally gets to Punp Pun. Finally takes control in a sense. All Punp Pun's negative emotions, his rage, his anger, his sadness, all in this one moment come out. And so during the struggle, it appears Punp Pun kills Aiko's mother. What proceeds to happen is probably the most popular part of Punp Pun, the most talked about part, which is Aiko and Punp Pun's escape. After they bury the body, they go on the run. But at this point, Punp Pun is not himself. You see, when you hold in trauma and resentment in for so long, eventually it's going to come out. And this was Punp Pun's breaking point. Essentially, what ends up happening is he puts everything not only on himself, but also on Aiko. So while they're on their escape, Punp Pun not only decides that he's going to punish himself by getting himself hurt or putting himself in dangerous situations like assaulting people, he's also going to punish Aiko. He abuses her mentally, physically, verbally, and this just all culminates to Aiko almost breaking down because the person that she loved has become a shell of his former self. Doesn't help that as their journey continues, both of their mental states deteriorate drastically, with Punp Pun getting angrier and Aiko getting more and more paranoid as time passes. Eventually, Punp Pun just decides it'd probably just be best if we both died, and gives Aiko one last day with Punp Pun, his actual true self, which finally shows Aiko that Punp Pun did love her, but he's going to kill her now. That's when Aiko reveals that Punp Pun didn't actually kill her mother. She did. In the few minutes that Punp Pun was gone doing something, Aiko took a knife and finished her mother off, killing her, basically absolving Punp Pun of any crime. Punp Pun decides to stay with Aiko because at the end of the day, he loves her, but he doesn't turn back to normal Punp Pun. Again, he's in this form because of all the trauma that he experienced in the past. It isn't just because of Aiko. It isn't just because of what he thought he did to Aiko's mother. This is years and years of trauma bubbling to the surface, and this is how he's expressing himself. He's gonna need therapy, not whatever this is, before he can be fine. Eventually, the police find Aiko's mother's body, and Aiko and Punp Pun start to accept that, hey, one of us might need to go to jail. And Punp Pun is just like, even though I didn't kill her, I'll still go to jail for you. Which, again, proves to Aiko that, oh my god, he loves me. He is willing to do anything for me. My dream is complete. I found the one person who would love me unconditionally, no matter what. And so she decides she's gonna free Punp Pun. And so the next day, Punp Pun finds her, as she has taken her own life in a way to save Punp Pun. And Punp Pun, in denial, walks with her body and talks to her, telling her everything that he wanted to do with her. And after leaving her body, Punp Pun goes back to the miso factory and has one final confrontation with God and basically decides, I'm going to carve you out. I'm done with you. And so he does that with the full intention of dying on that rooftop. But this entire time, Sachi has been looking for Punp Pun, as she does truly love him. Now, Sachi is the opposite of Aiko I mentioned earlier, simply of the fact that Sachi also comes from an abusive household, just like Punp Pun and just like Aiko. The difference, however, is that she refuses to live in the past like they do. She wants to look towards the future and try to improve herself. So when her and Punp Pun had that big fight, she realized that she really didn't know a lot about Punp Pun and decided that she would want to get to know him in an attempt to try and find him. And this leads her all the way back to the miso factory around the same time. She finds Punp Pun sitting up there, bleeding out. She extends her hand, and Punp Pun takes it. Finally, Punp Pun has found his light in the darkness. At the end of the day, Punp Pun turns himself into the police at the hospital while in human form. And our story ends with Punp Pun being content that he needs a lot of time to heal. And that is okay. The overarching theme that I saw with Punp Pun is the fact that this is a character that experienced a lot of trauma and didn't have any outlet or any help to grow as a person. And due to his trauma, he kind of latched on to one person that did make him feel good. The problem is Aiko also had her own problems, and they just thought that if they were together, their problems would disappear, that they would just save each other. But a drowning man will drag you down if you let him. And that's what they were doing to each other. Unfortunately, their feelings for each other, even though real, they were just two damaged people that just weren't right for each other at the time. And I think that's why Punp Pun is so good. It's such a subtle story where it tells it very slowly and gives you these storylines in a very realistic and human way. I mean, when Punp Pun's a kid, we see the world as bright and happy and everybody's a little bit goofy. And then as Punp Pun kind of grows up and we see his mental state change, the panels become darker and the world around Punp Pun becomes a lot more boring and dull. And I do think that the two themes, guilt and dreams, is handled very well, even though the story does feel like it gets bumpy here and there, because it generally just does feel like something's happened to Punp Pun for the sake of a bad thing needs to happen to Punp Pun. The story does stay consistent throughout, and it does always connect back to its original themes. Few stories can connect all their storylines like that. But honestly, even though this is an amazing story, I can't recommend it in all honesty. There was a lot of stuff that I skipped over. A lot of bad stuff that happens to Punp Pun or stuff that Punp Pun does. Or stuff that happens to characters around Punp Pun. A quick example is at some point Sachi does become pregnant, and that is supposed to be a big moment between Punp Pun and Sachi. And the reason I just didn't cover it is because it is such a well-written storyline, but I just didn't want to regurgitate every single story beat, especially the really sensitive ones, because in reality there are a lot of them, and you could pick any one of them and maybe make an hour-long video talking about each and every storyline in Punp Pun, and I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to talk about the overarching story and the overarching themes. And if after watching this video you are interested in this story, my recommendation is just, if you do read it, take it slow. And that's all I have to say. What are your guys' thoughts? Have any of you guys read Punp Pun? What was your thoughts if you did? I really do love hearing you guys' opinions, and I really want to hear your guys' thoughts on this story if you did read it, and what you guys really thought about the themes and everything like that. If you guys enjoyed the video, I make other manga and anime related videos, so maybe check those out. I made a video talking about JJK and how its ending was a little bit disappointing to me. And if you did like this video, do hit that like button. It does really help me out quite a lot, and I would greatly appreciate it. If you're new around here and you enjoy this video and you enjoy any of my other videos, maybe hit that subscribe button as well and join the discussions in the comments below.